for a while, it genuinely looked like Netflix was finished. Every major media company on Earth had declared war on streaming. Disney pulled its most valuable content. Warner launched HBO Max. Amazon bundled Prime Video into its massive ecosystem. Apple threw billions into Apple TV Plus without caring about profit. Suddenly, Netflix wasn't the only game in town anymore. It was just one player in a battlefield filled with giants who had deeper pockets, bigger brands, and decades of intellectual property. The headlines were brutal. Netflix is losing subscribers. The streaming bubble is bursting. The end of the Netflix era. In 2022, Netflix stock crashed. Growth slowed for the first time in its history. Investors panicked. Analysts said the business model was broken. The company that invented modern streaming was now being described as its biggest victim. And then something strange happened. Netflix didn't collapse. It didn't fade away. It didn't get acquired. It didn't retreat. It quietly adapted, raised prices, cracked down on password sharing, launched an ad tier, and somehow walked out of the so-called streaming apocalypse stronger than most of its competitors. While others started cutting budgets, laying off staff, and canceling entire platforms, Netflix stabilized, recovered its stock, and kept growing revenue. The real question isn't why Netflix survived. The real question is why everyone else struggled. The streaming collapse, when growth turned into a trap. To understand how Netflix escaped, you first have to understand why the entire streaming industry became unstable in the first place. In the late 2000s, streaming shifted from being a disruptive innovation into a crowded market. What was once a simple alternative to cable turned into a fragmented maze of subscriptions. Instead of paying one company, consumers were now expected to pay 5, 6, sometimes even 10 different platforms just to access the content they wanted. Disney took back Marvel and Star Wars. Warner locked DC and HBO behind its own service. NBC launched Peacock. Paramount launched Paramount Plus. Everyone wanted their own slice of the subscription pie. The problem was simple. Consumers didn't want that many subscriptions. At the same time, production costs exploded. Every platform needed original content to survive. That meant billion-dollar budgets, celebrity contracts, global marketing campaigns, and constant pressure to release the next big thing. Streaming companies weren't competing on price anymore, they were competing on attention. And attention is a zero-sum game. If someone is watching Netflix, they're not watching Disney+. If they're on YouTube, they're not on HBO Max. So the industry entered a dangerous phase where growth slowed, costs kept rising, and profitability disappeared. This is what economists call a market failure. Too many players chasing the same limited resource with no clear path to sustainable profit. And right in the middle of that chaos was Netflix. Why Netflix looked like the weakest player. On paper, Netflix should have been the first company to fail. Unlike Disney, it doesn't have theme parks, merchandise, cruise ships, or billion-dollar franchises that print money. Unlike Amazon, it doesn't use streaming to support a massive e-commerce empire. Unlike Apple, it doesn't sell hardware or software ecosystems. Netflix has one product, a monthly subscription. That's it. No side businesses, no physical assets, no diversified revenue streams. If people cancel, Netflix loses money immediately. So when subscriber growth slowed in 2022, the market freaked out. Investors assumed Netflix had hit a ceiling. They believed the company had finally run out of new users, and if growth was over, then the entire valuation logic collapsed with it. From the outside, it looked like Netflix had built a fragile business model that couldn't survive saturation. But that assumption was based on a misunderstanding. Netflix was never optimizing for growth in the same way its competitors were. It was optimizing for something far more subtle. Netflix's real advantage, the attention machine. Most people think Netflix is a content company. It's not. Netflix is an attention company. Its real product isn't movies or TV shows, it's time spent watching. Every algorithm, every recommendation system, every thumbnail, every autoplay feature is designed to answer one question: how long can we keep this person on the platform? While Disney obsesses over franchises and cinematic universes, Netflix obsesses over behavior. What do you click? What do you skip? When do you pause? When do you quit? What keeps you watching at 1 a.m. when you said you'd go to sleep? Netflix doesn't need every show to be a cultural phenomenon. It just needs enough content to match enough micro tastes across millions of people. That's why Netflix can release hundreds of shows a year and not care if most of them disappear. They're not trying to create the next Avengers. They're trying to create infinite personalized entertainment. This is the part most competitors failed to copy. They built streaming platforms like traditional TV networks. Netflix built streaming like a data-driven machine. And that difference changed everything. The price strategy everyone thought would fail. Then came the move everyone said would kill Netflix. Price increases. At a time when inflation was rising and consumers were already overwhelmed with subscriptions, Netflix raised its prices. Not once, but multiple times. Then it cracked down on password sharing, something millions of users had been doing for years. On paper, this was supposed to be suicide. Higher prices plus stricter rules usually lead to cancellations. Instead, revenue went up. Why? Because Netflix understood something most companies don't. Demand for convenience and habit is surprisingly inelastic. People complain about price, but they rarely change behavior. Netflix had become embedded in daily routines. It wasn't just a service anymore, it was a default. For many households, canceling Netflix felt less like saving money and more like losing electricity. And that psychological position is more powerful than any franchise. Netflix didn't escape collapse by being loved. It escaped by being unavoidable. And that's where the real business lesson begins. Why competitors are struggling while Netflix isn't. The biggest mistake people make when comparing Netflix to its rivals is assuming they're all playing the same game. They're not. Most streaming platforms are not actually streaming companies. They are legacy media companies trying to adapt to a digital world that no longer fits their original business models. Disney, Warner, Paramount, and NBC were all built around cable television, box office releases, advertising deals, and physical distribution. Streaming was never their core identity. It was a defensive move. For them, streaming is a channel. For Netflix, streaming is the entire system. That difference is critical. Legacy media companies still think in terms of shows, seasons, and blockbusters. Netflix thinks in terms of retention curves, engagement hours, churn rates, and lifetime customer value. Disney can afford a $300 million Marvel movie because it will sell toys, park tickets, and brand deals. Netflix cannot. It must justify every dollar of spending through subscription behavior alone. That forces Netflix to operate with a level of cost discipline and performance measurement that traditional studios were never designed for. Ironically, this constraint became Netflix's greatest advantage. While competitors kept chasing prestige projects and cinematic universes, Netflix optimized for survival metrics. It didn't need to dominate culture, it needed to dominate attention. The hidden economics behind subscriptions. Streaming feels simple on the surface. You pay a monthly fee, you get unlimited content. But behind the scenes, the economics are brutal. Every streaming company faces the same equation. How much does it cost to acquire and retain a user? And how long will that user stay? This is where most platforms started bleeding money. Companies like Apple and Amazon can afford to lose billions because streaming supports their larger ecosystems. But companies like Disney and Warner actually need streaming to become profitable on its own. And that's incredibly difficult when content costs are rising faster than subscriber growth. Netflix, however, was built around this exact equation from day one. It tracks how much each user is worth over time. It measures how long people stay subscribed after watching certain types of content. It knows which genres reduce cancellations and which ones increase engagement. It doesn't greenlight projects based on creative instinct alone. It greenlights based on predicted retention. In other words, Netflix doesn't ask, "Will this be a hit?" It asks, "Will this keep people paying?" That's a completely different mindset from traditional Hollywood. and it's why Netflix can survive with fewer massive blockbusters and more consistent mid-level content. The goal isn't cultural dominance. The goal is mathematical sustainability. Netflix didn't escape the streaming collapse by dominating competitors. It escaped by outlasting them. While others chased prestige, Netflix chased sustainability. While others built fragile empires around cultural hits, Netflix built a machine around human behavior. It wasn't trying to be loved, it was trying to be permanent. And in business, permanence is the ultimate advantage. Because in the long run, the companies that survive aren't the ones that grow the fastest. They're the ones that design systems that don't break when growth ends. If you want more breakdowns like this on how companies actually make money, how business models really work, and why some survive while others quietly disappear, subscribe to the channel. This is Profit Logic, and this is how real power hides in plain sight.